So let me tell you a moment why I'm using Vue.js. I mean, we are using it for this class, but why that? You know, there are many other frameworks. Basically because it's simple. And it enables you to do the simple things in a simple way, which is a great way to start. And then there is always going to be a great number of different frameworks, and everyone has their own advantages and drawbacks. And I don't know all of them, but I know several of them. My quick and dirty comparison is as follows. Maybe people who have used others can also chime in if they like. But Vue.js has a very simple start. It becomes, in my opinion, quite horrible once you want to do modular things. So if you want to define components components of user interaction that get reused in multiple web pages, I think Vue.js goes into conniptions. I mean, it's clearly wrong-headed, okay? It does it in a way that is so complicated that when I read it, I blinked 4 times, I said, what? And then I said, no, all right? And that was my reaction. Now this goes on the video, but it's fine, I guess. So React.js works in a different way. React.js was, started at Facebook, no? And it works in a much more procedural way. You design a sort of procedures that spit out piece of the UI, right? And so it's way better for modularity, but it looks like gobbledygook when you write it. I mean, what I like about Vue is that you seem to write HTML with some small conventions, and so you can sort of visualize how the web page will be. Instead, in React.js, I really didn't like how it feels when you do simple things. Even though if you want to build some pieces of web interaction that you reuse in many different pages, it may in the end be a little bit better than Vue.js. Okay, so React is one that I like, but if you have a complexity spectrum, if you will, it's at the opposite end. Vue.js is great for simple things. React may be great for complicated things. And I think for a class, it's better to stay on the simple side of the spectrum. Angular.js is like this typical thing that embraces it and out of which you can never disentangle from the embrace. That is, you will see later on that in Vue.js, it's fairly simple to say, OK, Vue, you take care of this thing. The rest, don't worry, I take care of it. No? So if you don't want to use Vue for everything, there is a fairly simple way to tell Vue, essentially, that's your business, but the rest is my business, and I do something else for the rest of my business. Instead, Angular wants to be more all-encompassing, and I never used it fully, but I always found that it did a little bit too much for me. It got me too much stuck into some kind of thing that wasn't always what I really wanted to have. So that was a bit my impression of Angular. I don't know if the TAs, has any one of you used Angular for some time? Yeah. What's?
I mean, overall my experience was good, but I wasn't taking care of a small part of the page. It was encompassing entire page. Basically, it was tracking clicks.
Yeah, so it's a matter of preference. Angular is also good, has many people who like it, I guess, but that was slightly our, reaction. And those are the 3 I know best, really, and there are many others. But so, you have to choose, and in a sense, once you know some, you can learn the rest. Okay. So let me continue with what we were doing. Okay, oh, by the way, we had this wrong example of concatenation. I haven't really worked at fixing it, but let me try to fix it now, if the system is still up and running.
Question?
Yes?
Have you put this on Bitbucket so we can check out and follow along?
Yes, I did. Let me show you where it is, okay? But if you look at lecture 7, there is a pointer in the lecture 7 to index.html and default index.js. If you go to the lecture 7 in the class, I put both pointers to it and the explanation of where the thing is. So maybe have a quick look at it, because and if I go here, So it's in Vue simple examples branch of the startup, okay? And so you should be able to really check out and pick up from where we are and including the commits I do. Yeah. Okay, no, you're welcome. So yes, the truth here is that, what am I doing with the self counter? Oh, yes, I wanted to add simply something to the... So push is the way to add stuff to the end of an array, I believe. So I say push, and I can say self counter. Sorry, is just okay. Now, if I want to explicitly cast this to a string, how do I do? I don't know, but this is a simple way. I'm using a trick, you know. JavaScript will, yeah, I don't know what the right way is. I'm sorry. I use too many languages and I get confused among them all. But self counter is an integer and I want to cast it to a string. So I'm using a JavaScript trick that is fairly common. If you add a string to it, JavaScript will think, oh, let's convert both arguments to strings. So one is the empty string, the other one will now be a string, so that's a poor man's conversion to a string. Racksheet, you can search, what is the holy way to convert something to a string? I forget because I use these tricks so often instead, okay? So let me repair these. Let me rerun the web page. Okay. And so every time I push on the plus button, if it's a plus, it adds a number. Okay, this is great, but it's not, Now, what is that doesn't work? There are some things that don't work well with arrays. Let me check if I can get it into one mistake. So imagine that when the button is minus, I do another thing, and that is I replace the list of animals, the thing list. I say self vo thing list is equal to a list of A, B, C. Let me see whether this works. Maybe it works, but if it doesn't, I would know why. Oh, it works. Okay. So I want to tell you, because sometimes it's important, why this works, essentially. So what happens is this. If you go look at thing list, it's not quite only an array. How do you look at it? You go into the JavaScript console and you say app vo thing list, okay? And so it looks like an array. But if you go deep into it, in some place that I cannot find now necessarily, in this object, you find some things that have to do with the observation array. Okay, so this is an object that essentially behaves like an array but has some stuff additional to it. What happens when you modify an array is the following, or when you modify in general one of these data that appears in the data section of Vue is the following. When you give, when you have an array that is defined here, like this one, this is a plain old array in JavaScript. But things that are declared as members of this data have observers added to it. These are like sentinels that detect every change and trigger action on the part of Vue.js when they detect any change. What happens is that these are augmented arrays. When they detect a change, they are able to trigger in Vue.js the code that performs the selective update to the HTML of the page. okay? This is why not every data structure is reflected between the JavaScript and the page. You need to define them in this way in the data section, because those are the data structures that will have their own sentinels, okay? And there are some exceptions. So it's not always, there are some funny changes that now I can't remember. I wonder if Rakshit remembers. But there are some assignments that we run into them every class in which you modify them. And if you modify them in a way that bypasses the sentinels, then you are able to have changes in JavaScript that are not reflected in the UI.
So if we access the index directly, like list 0 is equal to, and if we update a
Oh, right, right. So Rakshit is having the right example. I'm sorry. And now this is it, yes. Every year I forget, and then I run into it, and then I solve it again. So let me change the behavior of the minus button, okay? The minus button, where is it? Oh, here, okay? So here is the case for minus, okay? Sorry, wrong comment, minus. And so I imagine I do self vo thing list of 2 is equal to, whale, which is an animal we didn't have previously in the list, okay? So let's see whether this works. When I press on the minus button, it should give me whale. Okay, now I redo these. I press plus and that's a 0. I press minus. Oh, and it works. Why? This was what was not supposed to work, right? Eh? Okay, let me find later some example that is not that doesn't work. Okay, but essentially the problem is this. That there is some way in which, instead of updating the array in such a way that you alert the sentinel, there are some ways in which you can poke inside a data structure and change it in a way that the sentinel is not triggered, and then the update is forgotten. There is one such trapdoor with arrays, and I think both me and Rakshit forget every time, but we will reconstruct it. And it's clearly documented in Vue.js. Maybe he can look it up now while, eh? Yeah, but we saw that instead it's done. So evidently, we will find for you an example that doesn't work, so that we will show you for next time, okay? Now, what I want to do this time is the following. Look at it a moment. Right now, we initialize the list to duck, cat, cow, and donkey. But the typical thing you have to do is that these lists have to come from the server. Right? So I want to tell you now how to get information from the server and how to send it back to the server. Okay? What job would we like to do? The initial list I want to come from the server, and then I want to have a button, and when I press the button, I want some behavior. For example, I don't know. The server will give me one more animal together with the current time, current server time, something like that. Okay? Let's try to implement these. So first of all, thing list. Maybe let me do a checkpoint in the repository, like before talking to the server. And so I want to do these two things and then move on to the implementation of the music player, right? That will give us a more sophisticated implementations. So let me now simplify this example. So I don't want this part anymore. I just want to reduce this code a little bit to the minimal part. Self my dog, I don't think I'm using it anywhere, so let me also chop it off. Okay, there is a thing list, there is an animal list. The thing list I initialized to empty. And the animal list, sorry, is what? Yeah, let me also initialize it to empty. Okay, so I don't want any of these things around anymore. Okay. Fine, some animals are not needed. Okay. Okay, so this is a sort of fairly minimalistic code. And now I want to say now I want to add some code that will do a call to read the data from the server. Let's see if I can write some code on the fly. Self get initial data. Okay, so I call this function, which I haven't written yet. But I do it in this order because I would like this function to be to be called after I define the Vue object, etc. So let me define this function to get some data. Self read, how did I call it? Get initial data is equal to a function of no arguments, okay, that does something. So how do you do a server call for data? Well, there are various issues. The first is that I need to call a URL, okay, and so I need to produce somewhere a URL to be called. So let me go in index.html and define at the top, where you see this my URL that was a placeholder for something smarter, I say like initial data URL. This goes to API get initial data. So this will be a call to a server function that I'm going to write shortly that will give me the data. And the reason I do it in this way is that I want to essentially use the Web2Py facilities for creating the URLs to create an appropriate URL. Now, in this case, this function is, this URL will not be signed. This will mean that anybody on the internet will actually be able to hit it and get the initial data, okay? This is a kind of a sloppy way to do it, but I don't want to bother with logins for this simple example. In the music player example, you will be able to upload your music and only you will be able to play it. And so you will see that those URLs are signed so that the people who are not logged in as you cannot forge a URL to get to your music, okay? So that's why I like to use the Web2Py mechanisms for generating URLs. In this case, I simply instead generate a variable called this way. And note that the JavaScript, even though it's written in different spots in the page, the scope for JavaScript is shared between these places. I mean, it may seem obvious, but I just want to draw your attention, right? This script is written at the beginning of the page, in the header, in fact, right? And your code is instead loaded at the bottom of it, no? Here. But once this code is loaded, it's all loaded into the same JavaScript pot, if you will, or container, right? So that the variable I declare at the beginning, this global variable here, is also actually visible from the JavaScript that I write in default index. I just want to clarify this because it's kind of normal, but not entirely. Okay, so here we have a variable, and I can say like the URL, so I don't forget, is this. Okay, so now I have to make a call to that URL and decode the result. And here the situation is this. How do we make a call to a URL? We cannot navigate to it. This is a JavaScript initiated call. And so what I'm using here is a library that is preloaded for viewing Web2Py and that is incredibly well known to JavaScript developers, and that is called the jQuery. jQuery comes with a lot of goodies. I just want to describe it a moment in general, but we will be using a very tiny slice of it for us now. jQuery is a library that enables you to do a lot of manual manipulations on a web page. It's able to locate particular elements, make them appear, disappear, expand, shrink, move stuff around. And it has all that kind of functionality. It is able to build accordions. It is able to build sortable thingies. I mean, it has a lot to it that you can go explore for yourself. In this case, however, we rely on it for two basic functionalities. The functionalities to essentially send information to and get information from the server. It would be a pain to do it ourselves, and it's instead incredibly easy to do it using jQuery. And so, if you look, I always like to show you where the real documentation is, so you can go look it up for yourself. So, if you go on jQuery, this is a home page, you can look at the API documentation, okay? And you can look at, now I always get lost here, and so what I really do when I need information is actually that I use Google to navigate those jQuery pages. I don't know why I get so incredibly badly lost. But I think that otherwise, yeah, you see, I get lost because it's organized in a way that, that boggles my mind in some way. Because what I would like to find is communication with the server, or AJAX, and I cannot find. Sorry? But where is AJAX? Oh, okay. Shorthand methods. So we will be especially using these shorthand methods, and especially there are two of them that I use all the time. One is called getJSON, and the other one is called post. GetJSON will perform a get to the server and will return some JSON and decode it for us. JSON, if you remember, is this way of taking dictionaries, lists, and simple Python data types and producing a string out of them. So the idea is that by using getJSON, we are able to poke the server, get simple information, decode it, and have it available to us in JavaScript, okay? Post will be the way instead that by which we will send information to the server via post request. Similar to thing when you do by filling in a form, a post request can ship actually to the server large amounts of information. Okay, so those two will be the methods we will use the most. And in particular now I'm going to use getJSON. And if you look at the documentation, it's very simple. It gets three parameters: a URL, some data that we send, which in this case actually we don't have any data to send, and a function to execute in case the thing works. Okay, and I just want to show you that this jQuery getJSON is just a general abbreviation for this AJAX function that you have that would be more generic and that gives you access to more options. So for example, you may wonder, how do I know if my request fails? Well, if you look at the AJAX method, the AJAX method has also some methods that enable you to handle the failure of communication, okay? I'm using shorthand methods, but you should look at the full-fledged method in order to know all the vast array of options you have, okay? So now, let me use a simple one first. Okay, and so here's some examples of use, okay? By the way, one of the things that I found very confusing at my beginnings when I started to learn how to develop for the web is the following. The jQuery library is often abbreviated as $. So the $sign, if you wonder what it is, it's a variable that is equivalent to jQuery, okay? Yeah, you know? The first who arrives squats on the most valuable symbol, right? So let me write, with this knowledge, let me write the function. So getJSON of URL, which is initial data URL, okay, actually it's better if I do it this way. So this is the URL, and then I need a function that gets data and does something. Okay, what does it do? It will. This data is a decoded object, and I have to decide what to put into it. But let me write this function a moment, and then I show you how I use it. Then I say self vo, what is it that I want to set as initial data? A thing list or animal list? I think they're the same. I don't know. let's set them both. Animal list is equal to data animals. Okay, and then I say self vo thing list is equal to data.things. Okay, so I can do this. Now I still have to write the function that generates this data. But first of all, I want to show you one very different style convention of JavaScript with respect to Python that is really quite deep and that we will see all the time. In Python, how do you write code that does a request and then processes it? Well, I may not remember fully the syntax, but if you use something like the requests library, import request. Actually, let me go show you how it is done in the requests library. The requests library is the most beautiful library in Python to do HTTP requests. Requests Python, let me Google it. Okay, and there are some very simple examples, and I want to just show you those examples because they do the same thing we are doing, oh, come on, I just want the JSON example. Yeah, you see, this is an example of how to use it. So you say R is equal to requests get of this URL. Okay, R is a request. And then you can simply say r.json and use it. Okay, so if I use the library, I would say to do the same in Python, and I just want to write the Python code so that you can compare. I would write something like the following: import requests. R is equal to requests get of my get initial data, and then I would write self vo animals or animal list is equal to r.json dot well, this is Python, so animals. Okay, and the same thing for the thing list. Okay, so this would be in Python. So sorry if I go slowly, but I think it's this is useful to see the contrast. This is how the code would be organized in Python. So fairly linear code, right? You do a request. The first line R is equal to requests, etc. That line would essentially hang for a few seconds or a few milliseconds, depending on how fast your network is. You would be stuck there. You know, the thread is stuck. Maybe your processor is processing other threads at the same time, but your particular thread is stuck. It doesn't do anything else. And then when the request comes back from the network, the execution proceeds to the next two statements that set the value of the local lists. This is the way in which you have learned how to code so far, right? You understand this way, right? This is the way in which you think code always works, okay? Now, JavaScript does something that is entirely different. And the difference, you know, is not super evident at first sight, but it does the following. When you do a request in JavaScript, it calls this getJSON method, and it gives it two arguments. It gives it the URL it has to call, and it tells it which function to run when it's done. So my question to you is, how long do you think it will take for getJSON to run? And the question is, the answer is a matter of microseconds at most, okay? Because getJSON does not hang around and wait until the call returns. All that getJSON does is this. It says, hey, do a call to this URL, and when it's done, this is the handler for the result. Now I'm done, okay? And JavaScript has an event handler that knows that when that particular network call returns, it will have to run it through that function, that anonymous function that you have provided there. This means that you need one thread in JavaScript to do all this business, and the thread is always free. So for example, if you need to send 10 requests, you can just cut and paste this getJSON code 10 times, and it's not that you do them sequentially. You do them in parallel, effectively, or in near parallelism, right? Because you call getJSON 10 times, and getJSON, I mean, maybe inside the jQuery has a buffered implementation so that you can limit the number of concurrent network calls. I believe that is the case. No, actually, I don't believe that's the case, but I think the browser has a configuration limit to how many contemporary network calls it will be doing, because there is no point in sending off 1,000 network calls at the same time. They all trample on each other's feet. It's like too many people through the same door, right? They occupy a lot of memory, and in the end, each one is starved for bandwidth, right? So a browser internally has a limit to how many you do, but if you cut and paste that code 10 times in a row, what you do is that, boom, 10 requests go out at the same time. They may each take a second, but the total time of processing each one of them is not 10 seconds, because they don't go one after the other. It's 1 second plus whatever overhead time you have for launching each call and retrieving its data, right? So this is called event-based processing, and it's the way JavaScript works. JavaScript can never be left to wait for anything. Whenever you do anything that is not as like a simple assignment, or whenever you do something that takes time, the way JavaScript always does is that it fires it off, and you provide it a handler from when the results will be back. Okay? Now, this makes the code slightly harder to read, because instead of reading stuff sequentially, you read code that in which the prosecution of a piece of code is contained in a function that will be called, right? And so this makes your life a little bit harder in a sense. In fact, in computer science, and I think maybe Cormac Flanagan teaches this in some of his advanced programming language courses, but there is a way in which if you have a long piece of sequential code and you put your finger in it at some point, with some past and some future, there is a way in which you can define an operation of generating what is called the continuation. And the continuation is the rest of the code wrapped as a function with as many arguments as there are things that from the past are needed in the future. No? So you could invent a better syntax for the JavaScript if you wanted. But this is the way it is now. You really have to encapsulate manually what is the future execution and on what it will depend on. The beauty of it is the following, and sorry if I go in such a tirade, but it's quite useful to know, and I think is a good culture in general. So, what is the difference? You can say, well, Python is fine, really, because it does these things in a more linear order, and if I need to have many things happening at the same time in Python, because suppose I have a lot of network delays, I can say I don't want sequential execution because this ties up my process of just waiting a lot of the time, so I want to create parallel stuff that goes on, no? So Python has some very nice libraries. The threading library, I used it very often. I love it, it's very nice. But what's the difference fundamentally? The difference is that in Python, switching from one thread to another is a heavier weight process than in JavaScript to just booking where these return functions are, okay? So, for example, Node.js is a server framework based on JavaScript, and it's able to treat each request it has and process it in each request in JavaScript, and the result is improved throughput quite often, okay? Because you don't have to do this heavyweight thread switching, you can just, schedule things and go execute a function when it which code to execute when it returns. I mean, it's a very efficient way of coding in total. In Node.js, even things like reading from a database are written in this style. So when you read from the database, you essentially say, get me this data, and then you specify the function that will act on the data once the data is back. That's the general way you do. So, at any rate, this is our call, okay? Now I have to do the following. I have to go on the server side and write a function at this URL that will return something that is readable from here, okay? That's not so hard to do. I go here. I define the controller to be in APIs, so I go here, essentially. Here go your API methods, and I say define. I'm sorry, but I forgot how I called it. I have to look up here in index.html. Get initial data. Def get initial data. Okay, and I have to return two lists, right? And I simply say return. response.json, this is a trick to tell it. You know that normally when you return a dictionary in Web2Py, Web2Py takes your dictionary, gives it to a template, and inflates your complicated HTML page, right? In this case, I don't want that. I just want to return a snippet of JSON, a string, essentially, that encodes a data structure. What's the way to force Web2Py to this second behavior? It's to write response.json. In which here I can specify any Python object, and in particular I will want to specify a dictionary that will say animals is equal to, and you know, now I'm writing happy Python, so I don't know, dog, cat, and fish. Okay, and then there are things. No, I believe I use these two lists. No, yeah, this is a comma, right? And things is a list of. You don't know, I guess it's going to be thing 1, thing 2, and thing 3, no? For Dr. Seuss lovers, I guess. No? Something like this. So that's all I need, because I'm inventing these lists. I'm not reading them from the database. But of course, you can write much more sophisticated code to generate these data structures. Let me generate another one, even though I don't read it, it's fine. Like other things is equal to A, okay, and now I define here in the code, no, A is equal to, what can I say that is semi-silly, is equal to A plus I for I in range 10. So, okay, so it makes this list, okay, just for the fun of it. Yeah, I shouldn't say plus I. Plus string of I guess. Okay, not very pretty, but whatever. Okay, just to give you some variety. Now let's test this code and see what it does. It probably blows up, but even if it blows up, it's interesting. Okay, so it seems to have worked. I don't see the animal list, but it's because you know, this animal list, I'm using it in the wrong format, okay? I'm just sending animals. I mean, this table, I'm not giving it the right material for this table, but it's fine. That's what I wanted to show you. I don't care about the table. Now, if you do this and you see that it works, is great, of course. But what happens if you mistrust it? You click on the network tab, and you see that when I do this request, oh, I have to click on all to see all the requests. There is this request to get initial data. If you click on it, sorry, let me shrink a bit the font, otherwise I don't see enough to be, you know. But if you click on that request, you can examine it, and you can say, okay, these are the response headers, these are the request headers, and I'm a bit confused because everything is so magnified, but let me try to. Status, main, domain, cause, type. Okay, if you look at the response contains in JSON, you can see exactly how it looks like. Okay, so this is the thing that was passed. There is a list of things, a list of other things, and a list of animals, okay? And if I click on the response payload, I'm sorry, I need to sort of, the response payload is instead the actual string. So you can see that you can examine either the actual string that was returned, this is the JSON dump of what was passed, or you can see it after it has been decoded in JSON, in JavaScript, okay? So you can see it either way. And this is incredibly important because we are unfortunately writing a piece of code that has a, you know, a bit that happens in the network, a bit that happens on the server, and a bit that happens in the client. And when you make a mistake, the mistake can be in either of these places. And so you need to know a tiny bit how to fish out for the places to look at, okay? So one place is in the network tab. You can examine exactly what was sent and received. It's incredibly important when you debug. The other place is, of course, in here, right? In Web2Py, you see that there was a request, and if there were any errors, you would see them in the Web2Py console. And the third place that you can check for errors is in the JavaScript console, if there had been any error in the request, you would see it here. In fact, I can generate an error by just saying here in my index.js, you know, in the function, I can also say like, I don't know, foolish, no? And foolish, I mean, I think it would generate an error because it's not defined. I believe so. I mean, who knows? JavaScript is so crazy. But if I do this and I reload the page, initially there is no error, right? But then when the network call returns, there is a reference error, and you would be able to find it from here. And it's kind enough that if you click here, it would actually send you to the place where the error is. Okay? So you have these three places that you need to keep an eye on when things don't work out as expected. The Web2Py output, a JavaScript console, and network tab. Okay? Now let me fix the error. Sorry, let me fix the error. And go on. So at this point, what I would like to, how to send the data to the server. Let me add a tiny bit of behavior to the plus button, okay? We know that the plus button, when it is called, let me remove this table. But there is this toggle plus button. Why do we call it toggle plus? Let me say, what do we want it to do? Let's invent a small function. Let me call it, I don't know, I don't have any very good idea. Yeah, maybe there is not so much innovative that I can say. Maybe I should go now to move to the example that I want to build. So we start on the music player example, okay? So any question up to this point? Is all clear? Now I want to really build a music player, and it's something that will take a bit of time. The only inconvenience of building a music player is this. Maybe if you have advice for me for how to conduct the class, it will be good. It's something that is not overly complicated, but is also not entirely trivial. So I didn't feel like I could come to class and entirely wing it, because I would waste the time on funny bugs. So what I did is actually that I already have a series of commits that does it in the repository. And I will try both to invent it and to explain you what I do in the sequence of commits. I think you know that this is maybe better than me trying to wing it on the fly, because it mostly works, but what I can do is make modifications each time you like and to experiment with alternate behaviors. So let me commit these. Git commit am like end of simple example. Sorry. Git push origin v simple examples with a space here. Now, the music player, I build it in a series of commits that are here. Okay, it's called Vue classes. Okay, and in these Vue classes, I've built, you know, you can see various commits. Actually, most of them are on the same day. But I built a lot of commits that contain the, you know, the code for the music player. And so let me go to the first of these commits and explain a tiny bit of what I've done. I've created initially a very simple scaffold that I don't love, but that works as follows. I created a track table that contains, so this is a very simplistic thing. When you do your own homework, you will have to make it more sophisticated in one sense. That is, here I'm not keeping track to whom the tracks belong. Okay, I believe that there are tracks, but there is no notion of the user to whom they belong. It's just a shortcut I took, okay, to simplify my queries. So for each track, I will remember the artist, the album, the title, how many times it has been played, when it was created, and even who created it, even though I don't keep track of who owns it, right? But I still store it in the database. but I don't use it in my queries, so there is only one list of tracks for every user of my system. It's just me cutting corners, okay? And what I did in default.py here is that sorry, it's here. I simply have an initial method that enables me to add tracks. And there is nothing else to it. So the index method doesn't do anything. Okay, and there is absolutely nothing that works except that I can add a few tracks by hand. So I don't know whether it's worth showing you the behavior, but this is the 0th starting point. If I go here, I get nothing, I get hello world. And if I go instead to start a default index to start a default add, I go to a place which presents me an old-fashioned and fairly silly form in which I can add one track one by one, okay? This is now a silly way to start, but it's a useful way to start because I can populate the database. Now my database is already populated, and so let me go on by one commit in my CVs. Here I tell you there is not so much else to do. So let me go here, skipping a tiny bit. And I want to go to the place where we can get fake tracks. Let me show you how this looks like, and then let me show you what is the idea behind the implementation. Please give me some feedback if you like by email. Like, would you like me to be typing these by, would you like me to be implementing these on the fly each time, or is it fine if I do this trick of going ahead in the commit? Each one has their advantages and drawbacks, but sometimes when the code is complicated, it does take me more than it would take me a few minutes to put it up. So this is what now I have in index.html. I want to show you essentially a horizontal thing for every track, and I want to say what the various fields of the track are. So I build a good old table, right? This is the results table, okay? I build a results table with a table called the track table, not a lot of fantasy, I admit. The header of the table contains artist, album, track, and number of plays. And the body contains track artist, track album, track title, and track num play. Okay? And then, because I don't want to ask, suppose you have a really large collection of songs, right? These, I assume that I've gotten some data from the server, but it may not be all the data that you ever have. So at the bottom, I have a button that says, so some of these things that I say, I copied it from last year's class, and the styling is not perfect, right? I have to change some of these classes as I go on to develop. So then don't worry about the button default rounded or so. But I say v-on-click get more. So that button essentially tries to load more tracks, and I want to show you how that behaves as well. Okay? So this is the very simple scaffold in which I just put up a table much as I did before. Now let's look at the code. Oops, sorry. Yeah, well, who cares? Why not? The code works in this way. I have some tracks. I have a flag that tells me whether you are logged in. And importantly, I have a flag that tells me whether you have more tracks than the ones I have displayed. So this is part of what I have to update, right? I want you to have always a list of tracks and a flag that tells me whether I need to show you the button to get more or not. Okay? Now, there is also one method. These methods are, the things that can be activated by pressing the button. So there is only one of those. You can do only one thing in this primitive UI I'm building now. And what you can do is call get more. So if you look at the previous page, if you look at index, this button, which is shown only if it has more, will cause you to call get more. Now, what does get more do in JavaScript? Okay, get more is associated to self get more, and it's a function that does the following. First, it puts into num tracks the number of tracks I currently have, because I want to know, right? If I have 60 tracks already displayed, I want to tell you, hey, I want more tracks. I'm already showing 60, so that you know, you being the server, you know which tracks to return to me, right? I need to keep track of where I am to be able to ask for more, right? So, so I put the number of tracks into num tracks, and then I call getJSON, exactly like I was doing before in class. And instead of specifying a URL dynamically, statically, I have a function, a sort of helper function that gives me the right URL for the case in which I need from num tracks to num tracks by +10. Suppose num track is 60, right? This will ask from 60 to 70, no? And so it will give me a chunk of more tracks. And so I have a helper function that I'm going to show you in a moment. Once I get back the data, then I do the following. Self who has more is equal to data has more. So data will be a structure with two fields. One is has more, and the other one is tracks. And when I have the tracks, I call my extend function that I wrote myself that will add more tracks to the end of tracks. Okay? So that's kind of simple. But there are a couple of tricks. So first of all, the helper function is kind of boring. You can go read it yourself. No? Well, okay, maybe it's not that boring. Let me explain it to you how it works. GetTracks URL uses two parameters, start and end index, okay? And it does the following. It generates a dictionary that says start index is this and end index is that, okay? And then it returns a URL done by, this is badly done. Later on in the code, I replaced this by a URL generator in Python, okay? But here I just have coded it to be, yeah, I don't know, bad. But, so by the way, let me tell you the reason why this is really bad if you do it, because often people do it in the homework and then they're screwed and they don't know why. The reason they are screwed is this, that they say /start. They test the thing and it works perfectly for them. Then they give it to another student to use. The student will load it under like start Joe, okay? Because they have their own startup and they want to now get the one start from Joe. But this URL is hard-coded to start, right? So even though they serve it from an app that is called Start Joe, this URL will go call their start version, and nothing will work. So this is a horrible idea to do in a piece of homework, okay? Never hard-code URLs or you will be dead. Not dead, but homework-wise dead. I mean, your app will be dead in practice, okay? So I do this horrible thing. And then I say that I use again jQuery to help me out, and I say jQuery.param of pp. This essentially will take my dictionary and encode it in a nice way. What is a nice way? Let me explain you. I mean, this is boring, but it's useful to know. So if I say jQuery.param of let me say, for example, something. This is a JavaScript object. It can be something like a cat is nice. Well, actually, I can try it for you. I don't need to do this thing. I can try it here in the JavaScript console. Let me really try it in real time so that you see how to try stuff as well. I go in the console and I say .param, okay, and I can say, for example, this is a dictionary, I'm sorry. Okay, so it's a dictionary. And in the dictionary, I can say cat is nice, dog, what do I write for a dog? I want something with some funny symbol. Well, I can say, maybe this guy has been bitten by a dog and so is less happy than could be, okay? So let's see what happens if I do this. You see, this essentially translates your string into a string that is safe to be used as part of a request on the web. Okay, When you use these request parameters in a URL, not every character is valid. There are many characters that need to be re-encoded in the right way. So I could not simply generate my URL by cut and pasting. Well, in the case of getMore function, I could, because all I'm passing are integers. Integers are translated back to integers. But it's a bad habit to do that, right? You need to encode parameters in requests so that they are written in a way that is safe to pass around. And this $$ function does exactly that, okay? So that's the way I'm using in order to build my dynamic URL. So sorry if I go into this, low-level detail, but, such is computer science. Even low-level mistakes are still mistakes. So yes, this generates my URL. Once I get my URL, I set the hasMore bit, and then I do this self-extend function call. This self-extend function, what does it do? It takes every element and pushes it at the end of an array. Not very surprising, okay? Fine. But you will see later why I write it as a function. Now, let me look at the server code now. The server code will be here. And it does as follows. This is a mock implementation, okay? I don't want yet to bother doing a database query. I'm trying often to build things by successive iterations. So this is a very good advice, by the way. When you develop for the web, move by small steps, trying to always mock what you don't have and make things go from something that works to something else that works, doing a commit each time, so that if you make a funny mistake and you break everything, you can also look at what you have possibly changed that can have broken your stuff, okay? So what I do is this. I read the start index and the end index. This code is not very fabulous, but essentially the problem is that I can read the start and end index, but these are giving back to me as strings, so I'm converting them back to integers. Then I build a list of tracks, and I build a random list of tracks. For hasMore, I always return true. And for logged in, I tell you that you're not logged in, just because I don't bother, I guess. I mean, later on we will have better implementations. So if I do this, and if I run this page, if I go to index here, right, in order to run it, this gives me 10 completely random tracks. Okay, and if you go to the console, you will be able to, to the network, I'm sorry. I should have maybe switch to a smaller font because I can never find stuff. But if you look at the network tab, you can see this get tracks request. By the way, if you click on the XHR, you can only, this shows you only the JavaScript, the AJAX requests. So you can click here, and you can see, the JSON that was returned. Okay? And if you click on Get More, these will get 10 more tracks and add them to the bottom. Without refreshing the page. It's kind of cool, no? So these don't change, but you get 10 more generating at random. And you can go as much as you want, and you can get as many tracks as you want. So great, this doesn't do a lot, but it does something. And let me continue a moment. So questions up to this point before I switch branch in the repo? You can play the same trick, and look stage by stage in the repo what I did. So prototype for a better API. By the way, we can, if you're curious, you can always see here what I changed. So in this case, here I didn't change anything consequential. Where am I? I'm sorry, I lost track. Where did I click? Here. Prototype for a better API. Okay, let me go to it. Why not? So here, instead, I'm actually reading from the database. So the way you read from the database would be this. You do a query, okay, and I'm using the limit by clause to decide which range of the query to read. This is common when you do pagination, you know, because the list of results can be very large, and you don't want them all, you want from number 60 to number 69. Actually, I'm reading one more. This is a very common trick. So if you need to know whether we have more data, the most common trick is to read one more piece of data. If you actually can read it, then it means that you have more. So instead of reading 10 songs, I read 11. And they give you back 10 songs plus the flag that tells me whether there is at least an 11th one or not. It's a trick, but it's much better than doing 2 separate queries to the database, right? So, you know, if I'm building one of the tracks that I need to build, I build it and append it to the list of tracks. Otherwise, I set the hasmore bit equal to true. Okay? And now I return truly the logged in value, and I give you this. Okay? Let me just check here to see if there is any change, but here there is no any change that I want to tell you about. But you can go read the database implementation, and now when I click here, if I okay, I have an error. Great. I think you know, I think my code used to work, but I think the error I may have gotten is because you know, I'm playing with this database, which is being always. So I think there may be an error due to that. But let us try to track the error. Where would you look if there is an error? Oh boy. Here. No? At the bottom. So in get duration is equal to r.duration. Oh yes. I removed the duration field. Strange, I should have had something in the... Yeah, anyway, I think I'll leave the error there. Okay? Well, no, maybe let me remove it. It's only that then I have to make a commit. Oh. Okay, fine. How do you do these things in Git? So I'm here, and I say, where is it that I can create a branch? New branch, like player fix. I can create a branch. It puts me into, no, maybe it doesn't put me there, but I can say, which branch I am? I'm player fix, yeah. So I can actually fix the error now in this branch, which was in api.py, and I can remove this duration that and rating fields that I have eliminated. Okay, okay, because they're not present in the database. And so if I do this correction, I think the code will work. Okay, and I get 3 not very smartly named tracks that I created while debugging my code. Okay, so fine. Okay, so you have also the fix. Now let me move on a bit. So what is that I need to do to make this player actually work? I need I need 2 things. Well, I need various things. I need a button to add new tracks and a button to delete tracks. Then I need a way to upload MP3 files for each track. Okay, because you know a track so far is simply something in the database that does not really have any music associated with it. It's simply the metadata of the track. So I will have to add tracks, delete tracks, upload MP3 files and stream MP3 files. These are by and large the various pieces that I need to put on. And so let me switch to the place where the button to add tracks works. And I warn you, it's going to be horrible, the button, okay, but it's going to work. And later on, I'm improving it to give it a better look. So let me reload these. Okay, so the way it works now, and again, apologies, and it will look better later, is this. That this button doesn't do anything because I'm not logged in, okay? So I need to log in. But if I am logged in, I think I used always this login. Okay, then this button works, okay? And if I click it, it shows me, and it could be more graceful in showing it, and it could have a slightly better interaction, okay? But these are, again, I improve it later. But it shows me point blank some place where I can add a track. I can say that the artist is, I don't know, Jim, that the album is How to Lose Your Mind. And the track is done, badly capitalized, okay? And so this adds it. And number of places equal to 0, okay? So this is kind of simple, but it's sort of the nuts and bolts, by which you can add data. And notice that this does not use any separate page. This is all happening on the same page. So this is a behavior I want to do. And this is interesting because we need to do various things. We need to generate a form. We need to be able to send it to the server, but not as before in Web2Py Classical by sending it to the server and reloading a new page. This will be sending it programmatically to the server. We need to update our list as we do that, and we need to open and close this form. So there are these various pieces that I want to discuss, and I think that will be likely the end of today's class by the time we are done. But let me show you first the HTML code, and then the JavaScript, and then the server code, okay? So the HTML code, there is always this code to display the tables, but there is some code before it. Sorry, now my editor is coming to grips with the fact that I switched the stuff in below its feet. So I have all this form to add tracks. Now this form, I admit, is not very well coded and is bigger than it should be. You know how I created it? I have to admit it. You know that I had a separate page by which I could add stuff written in Web2Py, no? I said, well, this is a nice looking form. I cut and pasted it, I plopped it here, and then, I fixed some things. So all these things like form group, help block, I don't do anything with them. But I just got them and they don't hurt, so I let them be. I mean, it's not great as a way to proceed. But essentially, I have a big form that lives in a div that has a Vue if is adding track. So essentially, the way you design in Vue is the following. You lay out on a page everything that should ever be there, okay? And then you control with the divs that contain a Vue if statement which pieces are actually shown at which time. And this kind of coding can become a little bit mind-boggling, right? And so sometimes you do it via helper functions, because sometimes if your page is complicated, you would have complicated conditions that tell you exactly what is visible and what is not. But for example, if I were doing an email client, you would think that you have two things that you want to show: the list of messages and then the individual message on which you are, I don't know, typing or whatever, right? I assume that simple example. What I would do is that I would put two divs, each with a Vue if, and then I would have two Boolean variables, one that tells me whether I'm looking at the list of messages, and the other one that tells me whether I'm looking at the individual message, okay? So here, in this case, the form that expands and disappears is controlled by this Boolean. Oh, I'm sorry, this stupid layout was on top of it, but it's controlled by this Boolean is adding track variable, okay? The form is normal, okay, and I'm using input tags for defining an input tag in a form defines a value, one of these spaces that you can actually fill in. Okay? And now I'm doing two magical things. First of all, you say, okay, fine, so you can type there Joe, Banana Smith, whatever you want. How do I fish it out from JavaScript, right? What you read and what you write. And so there is an incredibly nice way of doing that. There is this vModel statement that says, let's look at one of these inputs carefully. It says, I mean, this class is silly, it doesn't matter. The ID is also useless for us. What matters is the vModel. The vModel says, hey, what you're gonna type here is gonna be reflected in a variable called formArtist. That is what this says. Okay? So the vModel gives me the variable in JavaScript that corresponds to what is displayed in the form. And this is called, in Vue and in many frameworks, a two-way binding. So Vue is essentially helping me to do two things. Whenever you change the variable in JavaScript, the change will be reflected instantaneously inside the form. And whenever you change the form by typing stuff into it, the change is reflected instantaneously in the value of the JavaScript variable. So Vue will keep a perfect correspondence between the value on the screen and the value in your JavaScript variable. So when the user fills in the form, one character at a time, your variables get filled in with what you want. Okay? Quite beautiful. Now, the thing we have to do is that when you submit the form, when you hit on submit, we have to essentially say, hey, wait, don't submit it. Because if you submit it, this is a post of the entire browser page that would load an entirely new browser page. And that's not what you want. You want to essentially capture those values. So here I say, on submit. This is the way to say, on the event submit, we saw the other time on click, no, which is the way we catch a button click, and here instead we track the submit event. When there is a submit event, we prevent the normal behavior by doing .prevent. That prevents the normal behavior, which would be to submit the form to the server. And instead we say, call the function add track. Okay? The other thing on this page is kind of trivial. The table is as before, there is no change. And the button also doesn't do very much. The button adds track, calls the add track button, no, whatever, sorry. It calls, it calls a function that will simply, toggle the visibility of the form. So there is nothing to see there that is very interesting. The interesting part happens in add track. So let's look at the implementation of add track. Okay? So in add track, I need to do two things. I need to tell the server that there is one more track, and I need to update the track on the screen. Okay? And here, by the way, there is a little bit of UI to think about. Here I did it in a very simple way, which may be okay, but is not okay for all applications, and we go into it in a, next time. So essentially, there is the point, what if the network went down? This implementation will essentially add the track to the screen and do the request. If the request fails, it will fail silently. So you think you have added your track, you see it on the screen, but when you go, home, and refresh from the database, you will see that the track is not actually there. You don't have any visual indication of the operation on the server succeeding. And if you like, maybe next time, I will given the time, but if you like next time, I will show you how to add some visual elements of confirmation when you are adding a track, whether the track was added successfully or not, okay? So we will be doing that. But let's see how first to add a track in a very simple way. So the first thing is that this is going to be a post, not a get, because track information in general can be large, and it's better style to do this kind of network calls in which you send a lot of information to the server as post rather than get. So instead of a get JSON as you saw before, this is going to be a post. A post works in this way. You need to specify a URL, which is defined to my variable add tracks URL, and you need to specify an object. the data that is passed. This is a kindness of jQuery. This is going to be translated to JSON for view. I mean, it's going to be actually not to JSON, to a form. You will see later, but it's sent correctly in a way that is easily retrievable. Okay? So what you pass to the server is the value of artist, title, album, and duration. Duration actually is from the past. You know, I don't want to pass the duration anymore. We can remove it. But so you see that the artist is the content of the variable self_vo form artist, which is declared here. Okay? So to bind something to JavaScript from a form, the following happens. The form artist is defined here as a vModel variable that tracks it, makes it correspond to the JavaScript. Inside the JavaScript, it's declared as one of the data, because otherwise would not be able to know about it and keep the correspondence. And I refer to it as self.vo.formArtist, because that's the fully qualified way it's called, right? It's part of my vo object that is assigned to self.vo. So I'm sorry, I mean, it seems a little bit complicated, but I hope it's not, right? I mean, that's the way you refer to it, fully qualified way. So the beauty is that when the person clicks the button to submit the form, Vo has already been in charge of keeping the correspondence between the form and the JavaScript, so I can just submit the current values. I don't need to go fish anything out of anything. Everything is already ready for me to use. So I build this dictionary that I'm sending over, and when I get back data, okay, oh yes. When I get back data, data has an attribute track, and I add it to the list of tracks in first position. And then I call this crazy function. Why do I call this crazy web2py function? So this is to overcome a web2py behavior. Web2py, when you submit a form, this would not happen if I had just defined an add track button. But if you submit a form, Web2py disables the button to submit a form. So once you click it once, you cannot click it twice. This is a recent change that was done in Web2py to prevent people from submitting forms twice. Like, do you want to pay? Give me $100. Yes, double click, and you send me twice. Well, so in this case, because I do allow you to add multiple times a track, I need to enable the button explicitly. Now, note that there is I think, a bug in my code. You see, I'm submitting many times the same information. I mean, this is silly, right? I should blank this code. Okay? And so that's another change I can do next time. So next time I can do a tiny bit of work on forms and submission. Instead, now let me show you what I do on the server. I need to respond to this post, use this information to insert, and return the information on the new track. Okay? So what the API does is the following. This add the track URL, I believe now I defined it in a more reasonable way. Yes, I did. Is in API add track. And if I look inside API add track, what I do is simple. I say, I have an insert statement of artist, album, title, and nonplace is equal to 0. So I inserted the data that arrives to me. Notice how I can access these variables I have sent, right? To the variables that were sent in artist, this variable here, artist, is here accessible in request.vars.artist. Okay, so that's the corresponding place. You see, I have an insert statement. And then I don't quite know why I do it in this way, but I read it back from the database, and I return in my response JSON a track that is equal to T. Okay? I don't know why I do it that way, Frank. No, I know why I do it that way. I'm silly. The reason I'm doing it in this way is the following. I'm sorry, it went out of my mind and now I remember. So the problem is this. We have many tracks that are displayed. And later on, we can have buttons to either edit a track or delete a track, etc. Right? So we have, you know, this table of tracks. Actually, the table of tracks is here. And I will need to do something in order to delete this track. How can I know which track I'm deleting, right? I mean, they look all the same. The information is the same in the terms of strings. But so I will want to remember for each track what is the database ID of the track. No? So that this track will be correspond to database ID, say 8, I don't know which one, this 9, but I want to keep track of it. And in fact, if I look in the JavaScript console, I see that I'm doing that. Let me show you in the console. What is app.vu.tracks? It's an array, big surprise. But each track is an object that has what? Okay, so it turns out it seems I cannot examine easily the content. I mean, it has a getter and a setter, but it doesn't help me. Because these are functions. But at least you can see that for each track I have album, artist, created on, created by, and then there is an ID. This will be the database ID. Okay? So why do I need to insert a track and then tell the UI about the track I have inserted, right? Because you can say, if I have a track by the Rolling Stones, I might as well put it there in the list on the screen and that's it. But that would be more complicated. If I want every track to have, from the beginning, a database ID, then I need first to insert it in the database and then to return it so that I know which one is its database ID. Okay? So that's the point, unfortunately. Okay? So that is why I wrote the code in this fashion. Because if I, you see, I create a new track. Well, I could have written a different way, but the point is that if I don't insert it in the database, the track does not have an ID yet. And then it would be a strange track without ID that you are not able to delete yet because it's not yet fully inserted yet, you know? It would send me in a sort of no man's land in which the information on the screen does not directly correspond to the one in the database, and then I would have to be a tiny bit careful about the correspondence. And so here I cut corners in order to build a simpler web app, and I decided that I will insert the track in your list of tracks only once it's officially inserted in the database, and so it has also its database ID. Is this clear? I mean, there are various ways of solving this problem, and I think next time, if you like, we can play a little bit around with this implementation, and I can show you alternative ways of doing it. For example, one way that we can do together will be that when you insert a new track, I can insert it immediately in the list with an ID of the empty. I can fire off the request to insert it in the database. I can, in the meantime, show in the UI a spinner on the side of the track that indicates that the insertion hasn't really terminated yet, no, but is pending. And once I get the reply back from the server, I will shut off the spinner that tells me that I'm still waiting for confirmation, and I will instead fill in the database ID. That will be a more sophisticated implementation. It's actually not so hard to write, and so it will be a good exercise to start from next time, okay? So the code again at which we are is this commit here, button to add track works, okay? So if you want to replay and find the point at which we stopped once you are, and I think it's a really good exercise for you to review this code before next time. Okay.